Boom. There we go. We're live.
Welcome to the podcast this week with Joseph Johnson from Ultimate Athlete Concepts, joined by our authors, Jed Smith and Dr. Peter Smolianov. Thanks again, guys, for coming on and kind of helping us understand the Fringe Methodologies book. We really appreciate it. This week, we wanted to kind of move a little bit further into the book, looking at, kind of defining what makes something fringe in sport, because that definition could be dynamic or fluid, depending on where you're at, right? So, like if you're, in Australia, or if you're in Canada, that the definition could be different because it's fringe is relative, right? It's relative to where you're at or the sport system that you're in. And then there's a fringe for the whole world, like what is the absolute bleeding edge? So there's a little bit of, there could be slightly different definitions. If you would kind of give me an idea, like what were you guys, when you were writing the book and you're collecting the information, what did you use? Like, what was your working definition of what fringe was to you?
Well, Joseph, I would probably have to say there's a lot of ways you could define fringe, but I would say an activity that's really related to, but it's not central to what is widely practiced. So and it might not even be part of what is practiced. It's on the outskirts. So you have this core of what is well known and what we know to be true and what we do, but there's always an evolution. And so fringe is constantly on the outskirts, and eventually it does over time become mainstream. But fringe is dangerous as well, and that's kind of why we wanted to put the book together, because fringe can be incorrect, and there's so many coaches and so many athletes that when there's something new and innovative that comes out, which is every single day, and the way that the internet is allowed, information to go freely, everybody is coming up with new fringe methodologies. How much of that is valid, we don't know. Time will tell. But people tend to use emotion and excitement, and this is new, throw out all that is old, and jump all in on some fringe methodology, thinking that that's going to be the answer. And that is where it becomes dangerous. So we're kind of going to get into a little discussion on how to do that properly.
And Dr. Smolianov, for you, having your background, which is really unique, being in the Soviet Union, leaving, going to Australia, where they were really ramping up their system, if you will, and you were playing a role in bringing that together, and then coming here. How did what fringe, like, to you, how did that evolve, or like did it change in meaning to you as you came from the Soviet Union to Australia to here?
Well, the foundation that exists in different countries is also different. We all know that fringe methods are very, very different, but we have to also take into account that foundation is different. We call in most of English-speaking world, we call traditional Chinese medicine non-traditional. That's an example of completely opposite a point of view on some of the foundation that countries have. In the East, foundation is traditional. Here it's called non-traditional, where you use herbs and parts of animals as healing food. Yes.
So to us, that's fringe,
and to them it was
that's mainstream. That's core. That's the foundation.
Yeah, standard process.
So,
right.
To cut through, given the book is in English, I think our definition is that we consider the foundation of English-speaking world to be the necessary given. And in our fringe methods, we go beyond.
Mm-hmm.
So we probably apologize for calling some of the fringe methods that might be foundational and traditional in the Eastern, in some of the Eastern countries. We call them fringe because they're fringe in most of the English-speaking world for which we wrote this book. And also we also are trying to travel in time, and we consider some of the fringe methods perhaps to be foundational methods that are very well forgotten. So we're looking at the most new things and the very, very well forgotten old. Because we mention little things such as tea, which is, for example, in several recent years, tea has been tested and experimentally researched, and now found and announced to be a healing substance that is that is recommended to be used against many infections. For many countries, I would say this is a foundation that has existed for thousands of years that doesn't need any experimental research.
Right.
People do it anyway. But again, we're looking at some of the most recent experiments that rediscover the well-forgotten old and bring it to the menus of elite athletes that everyone could be using.
Yeah, this is an interesting that you make this point, Dr. Smolianov, because we about I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, we published a book called Explosive Ergogenics for Athletes, and it was interesting because most of the material had come from the former Soviet Union in the ergogenics area, and it had come from a lot of the guys there who were on the cutting edge. Nikolai Volkov, Dr. Rogozkin, Viru, many other ones, and ones that were pretty well, very well known there, still weren't even known here. So some of them had just kind of gotten relevance here, or still haven't, but they were very well known, in the Soviet Union. One good example was like mineral orotates, potassium orotate and magnesium orotate as anabolic. You've never seen that in any supplement in the United States being portrayed as an anabolic, but it is both substances. And it was kind of interesting to me that it still wasn't getting exposure here until Rick Bruner wrote the book, and he'd done work closely with Dr. Michael Kalinsky, who had high level, exercise physiology professor from Kiev. So it's kind of interesting in that regard, that it was more than fringe in the United States because it was unknown, so it was even further out than the fringe. And that was kind of an interesting, point. I know that from your own personal experience, obviously going from the Soviet Union to Australia to here, that had to have been remarkable differences in what was being regarded as the fringe.
Yes. But I think even with some of the methods that existed in the Soviet Union, not all of them have been continued. So now there has been some revival of some methodologies that existed in the Soviet Union, and current Russia and China are trying to revive many of those. And I think reassurance that these methods work are needed. So I think we're trying to also bring some of the fundamentals, formerly ancient fundamentals, and show how they can be used now in a more effective and efficient way. Again, the most fundamental substance that China and East and a lot of the Middle East has been using, it's garlic. Now we know that the Chinese athletes are using special juice, garlic juice, and it's in the gyms as given to athletes during their practice time. Again, this is something new, perhaps more concentrated, more enhanced. We are trying to get a hold on what are these new methods. They're and some of them could be called, again, very traditional. They are fringe if they're used again in a more sophisticated way. So these are also fringe.
Yeah, it's fascinating, the differences that we see.
I'd like to throw in something that, Peter, you told me when we were in Toronto, when we first met in face-to-face, and I took these notes, and you talked about some unspoken pillars in Russia in coaching, and one of those was the principle of consistency. I don't know if you remember talking about that, Peter, but that was very important. I found applying that on fundamentals without changing too much for the athlete, because the athlete, that consistency where they, with the motor learning and the understanding of what's coming to build confidence and so forth. And a lot of times I think coaches tend to grab something wholesale, this, some new training, and I'm going to apply it. And then maybe that's not the right thing for the athlete. We'll talk about change here in a little bit, but when to change and how to change and what's the appropriate change, and just the proper evolution so you don't break from that consistency that the athlete needs. But that really helped change the way I programmed, and the numbers of our athletes, like anecdotally and running, we could run the numbers and staying on similar type programming, the athletes have went through the roof as far as strength, power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
yes,
that would
the unspoken fundamentals that everybody should be first putting in place. Is consistency, meaning you have a regular practice. It means that there is a basic periodization that is for everyday training. It's not your program, but it's a system. I think this is one of the most fundamental Eastern concepts that we are now embracing, as we're embracing yoga in past 10-20 years as very natural now sport. Before it was something foreign and weird and fringe, but in past 10 years yoga became a legitimate part of any training program.
Yep.
And that's and these systems like yoga, they teach you that you must put in place not a program that has a beginning and has an end. A very Western results objective driven approach, but there should be a system in place that is permanent. You brush your teeth in the morning, it's a system that is there permanently. So the concept of training every day or its active rest is the fundamental concept that must be in place before you start thinking about any kind of fringe. And that's where consistency that Jed is mentioning is important. So every day you devote a couple of hours a day to physical culture and training, whether it's physical or psychological or diet or active recovery, but you must devote at least a couple of hours to your physical culture, and it's not and it's system. So that's what's consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And every day it's again it's some of it is strength, some of it is for your endurance, some of it for your coordination, flexibility. So all these components of high performance management fit within this concept. And the second critical part that is part of periodization is your gradual and seamless progression. Again, you look at any Eastern combat practices, yoga, or now Qigong and Tai Chi, all these methods. What you do is your progression is very slow. And that's the contradiction to the expectations that we in Western Europe and in North America are still locked into as our paradigm is. We want the results within a month or within this within this quarter, or at least next financial year.
Right. You're exactly right.
As opposed to 5 years, which is the minimum time where you can expect any kind of change, any kind of permanent change that occurs within this human system should not take less than 5 years. Otherwise, it's too much stress, and it's not going to be again your lifelong change that is a healthy habit. So if you start running, you add 1 minute a day to the time that you run, and that's so you increase your load very, very gradually. Right. So that's the second key concept of the unspoken given principle that should be in place before you have any kind of scientific periodization, and then any kind of fringe methodologies that you're experimenting with.
This had been related to me in a couple of different ways, and the way that I've related it to athletes and coaches is that, if when they come to me and ask, how can we develop the youngsters' athletic ability, and I always tell them it should be very similar to a music lesson. You don't learn how to play the piano in 6 weeks. Learning how to play the piano is a lifetime, or a long course, right? Because you're not going to become an international pianist in 6 months. It's going to take years, and it's a gradual process. You go, you practice, then the teacher gives you a new thing to practice, and it just gradually, kind of increases. And Dr. Veroshansky would always say, he two things. One was that you can't have 9 women, pregnant women, make a baby in 1 month. It still takes 9 months. And secondly, he says, as you make changes, everything should dovetail. There should not be these abrupt changes all the time, but they should just kind of slowly, as one thing comes out, something slowly comes in, but it's a gradual process so that the body, and you can speak to this, Dr. Smolianov, that the body's adaptation then is firmer, deeper, and more permanent when the changes are more subtle. If they're abrupt and really, jarring to the body doesn't draw from the same adaptation reserve. Like it adapts differently. Like easy come, easy go, I guess is an American phrase for that. If you get it really fast, you can lose it really fast. But the opposite is true when it's done gradually. Could you kind of elucidate that just a little bit?
Well, absolutely. The injuries, on micro level very often occur because of this. on a short term. On a longer term, you lose your participants because of this. If you start too fast, even within the meso and macro cycles, you need to have very gradual, slow progression, so that you do not overload and you do not exhaust the immune system and the system of especially for developing bodies, especially for those who are still growing, for children.
And high school athletes as well, obviously, teenagers and young adults.
Yes. So so the dangers are on the short term injuries, because you overload and don't give enough rest, and don't have a proper adaptation processes. And the second is your psychological reasons. So dropouts because it's too hard, and you're not used to it. The large volumes are not natural to you. You're not used to sustaining long hard work
all the time in a chronic way.
Really so it must become your natural habit before it is too stressful for your body. So you can only sustain that stress if you're comfortable with this on all levels, on physiological level, psychological level. And we're also and then on the macro organizational level, we have everybody who surrounds the athletes, and they also must be ready for increased loads, for that stress that athlete is in, so that they can support. Because behavior is becoming more challenging, and the support services then are becoming more overloaded and more challenged as well.
Yeah, it's critical, like you said, that having that support team there, and like what we talked about last week, where we're discussing, having that performance model where they're surrounded by experts in each area. So if, let's say, for example, if they're really stressed mentally, the psychologist would be able to assist with that and kind of say, hey, we need to dial this back because they're not handling this very well. Or the physiologist might say, the systems are under a lot of stress and it's too much. We need to, so they all are reference points for the central coach, I guess, to help with that process to make sure everything stays, on that trajectory. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. What I'm saying is that as the fundamental periodization is bringing athlete to higher level of development and stress, and higher loads, greater stress, and more fringe methodologies introduced on the way, there is a need to increase the amount of support, number of times you test the body medically on all parameters, all physiological and psychological support from a coach, and then further down the line with specialists. Otherwise the body is gonna break down, and So, but this again, this system is increasing this input into athlete together with these growing fundamentals and with a growing number of fringe methods that coaches and other specialists are trying.
And I think I want to add to that it's important that a coach explains to an athlete that it is a gradual progression. A lot of high-level athletes don't reach their true potential because they jump to another method because they aren't getting the results that they think they need to be getting right now. It seldom ever happens, instantly like they want it. It takes time. And if it's properly planned out and the athlete is consistent, they'll have consistent gains. And a lot of times they'll jump and go to more fringe methods because they think that's going to help. And I've seen very high level athletes fall off and so much talent, but they didn't stay long enough. They jump. But the ones that are the most patient, the athletes that are the most patient and they have the best habits and their habits can keep them on track and they stay consistent and not constantly moving to different fringes, they have the greatest success. They can master boredom better than anyone else. The high level athlete can, because to be able to be great, you have to stay consistent, and it might not be the most exciting. It's just day in, day out, and the gradual increases. It's not, oh, this is all new, and then this is all new, and then this is all new.
Right. A lot of people, a lot of coaches and athletes have ADD, if you will. Like they're constantly looking for. There's a magic bullet, which there is none. They're great methods that are effective, but it all has to be from what I told the coaches. It's contextual. It depends on the situation and where does this fit. And to your point, Jed, I'll give you another anecdote that's interesting. Dr. Bondarchuk, a lot of his athletes will train twice a day, 5 days a week, especially at the high level, right? And it's the same workout 10 times. Nothing changes. 10 times a week. The athlete does the same exact thing. And he does it for about a month, and then Dr. Bondarchuk will change the exercises, parameters, and everything else. But, and here we're talking about the great, and this isn't like just some guy. He's the greatest coach in history, in Olympic history. No one's ever dominated the Olympics like he has. And it's funny because you think, okay, he's got all these cool, neat workouts that nobody's, no, it's pretty rote.
Over and over.
It's over and over again. Yeah.
The basic.
And that speaks to kind of like also what Dr. Smolianov was saying is gradual, drip, 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 and then eventually, and the body's adapting, but it's doing it slowly, but it's doing it permanently as well.
And I think that's important. That's why we wanted to kind of discuss this, because fringe is additions that can impact and bring an athlete to a higher level, provided that athlete has developed and spent long enough time doing the basics and the foundational work. And Peter was a world-class athlete. How much of that was over and over and over and over practicing the same things, Peter, when you were an athlete? Most of it.
It's over and over. It's over and over. But there is, in this over and over process, is your daily warm up, daily cool down, daily recovery. So it must be, if it's large volumes, increasing volumes in the beginning of your season. The critical part of it is proper conditioning of all your joints and all your systems, so that these volumes do not result in injuries.
Right.
And this over and over is, you have the same over and over proper warm-up, long warm-up, and if you're lazy on this warm-up, which most of athletes sooner or later become,
they get bored with it.
paying. Yes, you pay for it. If not now, then you pay for it at the end of your career with some chronic injury and illness.
And the recovery, the same afterwards. Whether it's sauna, stretching, with the yoga, with maybe the contrast therapy in the tubs, that all of this is part of the over and over and over and over again. The better you are with your habits throughout your day, the better you will be as an athlete. The most exciting part is the actual workout, the work, what you like to do, the exercise part. But the other things are just as important to prolong, and that's the long-term athletic development that we're going to get into. Just having athletes understand that more than just the act of doing the fundamentals, there's more to it. All pillars need to be applied.
So as we go to this next point, the disclaimer is diligence and consistency is the key. That is the basis. That's the crux of everything.
Yeah.
It has to be good coaching, good knowledgeable coach, and then the athlete, once the good coaching is in place, it's simply diligence, consistency, constant effort, doing what needs to be done each day the way it needs to be done. Now, if we have that in place, this is part of the reason why you guys wrote the book. If
Right,
that's in place, if it's in place, then how does the athlete and the coach know when to invest in Fringe methodologies? Like, when do they know, okay, now it's time, we're going to make this little tweak, we're going to add this new dynamic to the situation? How do you know when to add them, and are they one at a time, and what are you drawing on?
And you know what, Joseph, Peter and I talked about this a little bit here just before, and this is a exciting part for me because I am a practitioner. I coach every single day. I haven't stopped coaching for the last 25 years of my life, and it's very interesting because these methodologies keep popping up. There's a great book by Jim Collins called Great by Choice, where they actually did a study of over 20,000 corporations, and they came up with a group of companies that they called 10Xers that grew 10 times faster than whoever they're competing against in the same industry. And it had to be done in an adverse time. They had to start low, below everybody else, and grow 10 times faster and get to the top of their industry. So they identified these companies, and then they found the common denominators of why they came from down here, blew past their opponents, okay, to get to the top, and did it in the most unopportune times in history. Like, for example, Southwest Airlines going to the top right after 9/11. How did these companies do this? And so what Collins did was brilliant, broke down the commonalities, and you can apply those as a coach, because what he did here is found out when to change. When did these companies change? When did they apply the innovations? Okay, so innovations are always coming out, but what they found is if you're the first one to apply the innovation, you're pumping all the resources into it, you're making the most mistakes on the innovation, and it can kill your company. It's the ones watching, okay, and you hate to say this because we need innovation. Someone needs to go out and create, but it's usually the ones that come along next and see the mistakes that were made and apply it a little bit, maybe with a little bit more reserve, and they do it a little bit better. So they see it and they go, okay, that was a great idea. We learned from their mistakes. We don't have to invest as much, but there's something there. And those are the ones that really, they let everybody else spend the money on the R&D, and they take those concepts and then they move on with it, but they're not the first. It's not the first. The first ones end up spending the most, okay? And it really can kill them. but it was there's an interesting analogy that he makes. He actually, as he writes the book, there are two expeditions to the South Pole. First to be, one is from Norway, a group from Norway, and the other one's from England. And it's this Amundsen expedition in 1911 versus the Scott expedition. And the one, group that this is kind of interesting. They took all the most modern technology. They ended up taking new textiles. These are the Englishmen. What was the new clothing and whatnot? Snow machines, all this modern technology. They went fringe right away. Let's get what's the latest and the greatest in innovation, and we're taking it out on this expedition. And then Amundsen, they took things from the Inuits. They went and studied, like, okay, what are people who've lived in these cold climates for centuries? And how did they eat? What did they wear? How do they move through, basic dog sleds, things like this. Okay. And then they had a race. Both groups started at the same time, see who could make it to the South Pole, and then back. Well, let me just say, the Scott expedition, everyone died. The innovations didn't work. They froze to death. Everyone died. Amundsen's group, same time. They went out all the way back. They didn't think it was that difficult. One group said it was hell. It was the worst thing that could ever happen. Nobody could survive this. This is impossible. And the other group, it's not so bad. So there was a lot that these companies that came and rose to the top, they had all the same commonalities as Amundsen's group and Scott. It's kind of interesting. So it's for a coach or for anybody who is studying how to implement change, this book goes through point by point how it should be done. And for example, one thing is, a concept of firing test bullets versus firing cannonballs. What I have learned is take maybe a group of athletes that doesn't necessarily matter as much right now. Maybe they're red shirts. Start the small change experiment on the red shirt group. Okay, see how well it does through versus the athletes that are maybe more important at that time, and then that you can implement that change and it doesn't disrupt the system as much. Simple concepts like that, but that's absolutely the right way to do it. Small. Let's try something that's not going to be so costly. See if there's merit, and then if there is, now we know when to kind of plug in. I'll let you guys comment a little bit on that, but that's in an essence some of what can be done.
Yeah, Dr. Smolianov, I'd love to hear what you had to say about that, and then as being a coach and a scientist, how you make that determination as well as, like, when does it make sense? Where is that application valuable?
Yeah, I think the example with Scott and Amundsen is very important because you can see what Norwegians are doing now with their medal count, as well as their mass participation practices and health of the nation. And again, it's an exemplar. It's any country will find some of the best practices that they can borrow to enhance their system, because they're probably ahead of the world on both some of the most fundamental and fringe. And I think while taking high tech and mechanisms that could be called gadgets is going to give you a much smaller percentage in terms of performance enhancement, as opposed to using some of the ancient, very hard, very difficult, very painful to adopt practices I think Amundsen also at the micro level, they ate the dogs they traveled with. Maybe Scott's group was I don't think they were doing it, and the changing your habit from eating meat that you used to eating dogs is very, very challenging. I think this is what Norwegians did, though, and this is one reason they survived, because they they were not afraid to change their mindset completely and to change their behavior to the point which no one else could, and make an outrageous Fringe their foundation of what you eat every day. You travel on a dog, then you kill it, and then you eat it.
Decisions had to be made. Like you said, decisions had to be made.
Yeah.
Whether you want to live or not.
The one thing I want to add is the concept of a 20-mile march, which is a very big concept, and its periodization is really what it is. So Amundsen, he said, what we're going to do is our team is going to travel 20 miles a day, no matter what. Some days the weather is going to be brutal. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very, very hard, but we still go 20 miles. Other days it'll be average. It'll be, somewhat of a challenge, and we make it. Other days the weather's going to be easy, but we only go 20 miles every time. Some days it's going to be hard. Some days medium. Some days easy. But we don't. On the easy days, we still cover our 20 miles, and it's recovery. Medium is medium. Heavy is heavy. Scott's group, they went with the weather. If it was a nice day, they went as far as they could, and they overexerted themselves. Okay? Medium days, they still went as far as they went. Bad days, they were afraid we can't go anywhere, and they never had any consistency. So they overexerted themselves at certain times, underexerted themselves in certain times. There was zero consistency. So the one thing you can take from that is you have a plan, you have the system, follow the plan, don't deviate, stick to the plan. We put all this time and effort and energy into designing this. We used our minds and what we know and our intelligence to put this in. Don't just throw it out because of the weather. Still do the plan.
This goes back to things that I relate to the athletes a lot, the younger ones, is that, on certain days I say, well, I can do more work today. I feel great.
Right.
And I always tell them, no, we're going to work. We're going to adhere to the plan.
Yeah.
Always. We never come off of the plan. The only time we come off the plan is if you're feeling crappy. Then we're going to, maybe we're not going to push you as much. And I think that Dr. Smolianov, what you related earlier about the technology, there's a great example in today's world. You guys, I'm sure you see it or hear about it. There's a ton of tracking technology in the United States now, right? So you got the different ones, the GPS, HRV, a lot of different, there's a ton of things now. They're measuring things 6 ways from Sunday.
Every company, everybody, there's a million companies that are trying.
Yeah, you guys go to a national level conference, and it's peppered with. That's all it is, right? And there's a director of science who's managing all these things. And here's the irony: everybody's getting hurt at exactly the same rate they were before, maybe higher. But like if you look, for example, NFL is always an easy example. You look in August, how many people drop with non-contact injuries? It's astronomical still, right? And so I was having a conversation with a friend of mine in the field who's works for an NFL team, has all the technology, they get everything. They see more technology than any of us because everything gets sent to them because, the new companies want them to send them, their stuff to try it out, right? And everything that they've used over the course of how many years, he said the single most effective tool is the RPE test. The athlete tells them. And literally the most accurate measure of where the athlete's status was the athlete. Once he understood what the anchors were, you know, like what each number means on the rating of perceived exertion scale, he was the most accurate at predicting a problem or an injury. And I asked, I was with Dr. Bondarchuk at a conference, it was about 8-9 years ago, and they were having this exact talk. And he said, what are we talking about? He says, here's how I check. How you feeling today? Okay. Watch him throw a couple times. Okay. I know how they're doing. He says, I feel good, and he's throwing far. We're doing fine. He feels crappy, and he's not throwing very far today. Okay. He's not doing good. So we're going to have to scale it back. But it's not, you know, we've seen an overcomplication of an issue that doesn't need it. Like the old-fashioned way still works, right? And I think that, does that, Dr. Smolianov, does that resonate with you? Like, you know, kind of what we've seen in the United States where we've overcomplicated some of these issues?
But also, what is predominantly an issue? What is predominant problem? I'd say is reliance on a gadget without the fundamental coaching,
Right?
Experience coaching theory behind it, like the space cosmonaut device for cosmonauts to evaluate their today's condition can only be useful if it's done by a professional who, just like you said, can first of all ask and evaluate a participant based on their personal experience. Look first and then ask to perform and evaluate their readiness to go ahead with a plan.
Mm-hmm. And it goes back
only the device is only going to give you a hand in that, maybe reassure you as a coach or very experienced athlete as well. The athlete also looks at the results and has this input. So what we see without fundamental coaching education and sports science knowledge, it's not going to work. So all this gadgets are only helpful if fundamentals are in place, and it's also a coach athlete relations that must be very well developed. In addition to this, so that there is a trust in the leader and trust, so that the athlete must know when to follow, when to step in and say, no, I'm really not feeling well.
Right.
So this is developed over a long period of time together with the endurance and strength the athlete is developing. Together with this, must be developed skills of taking advantage of the coach that you work with, and know when to follow and when to step in and say, we need to adjust.
Mm-hmm. And that goes back to what we were talking about, the unspoken principle of gradualism that you were saying before. You take an athlete, a young athlete, and you're developing the foundation. If you're following an RPE, they don't know what they've not been exposed to, and they don't know the barrier they've never been to. So gradually taking them up. If you asked, how difficult was that, every time they'd say, well, that was so difficult. Well, then you could never progress. So a coach with experience slowly brings them along, builds their confidence, brings them to a new level, to a new level, to a new level. And you have a good systemized plan, a 20-mile march. Now Now you'll build periodization in for the athlete and make adjustments where needed. But again, we need to get this work done. We have to get this done 20 miles. Today is easier. The weather was better. It's that same concept. But the athlete doesn't know what the athlete doesn't know. If the athlete's never been exposed and never been there, you're limiting with monitors and technology and gadgets and gimmicks and even RPEs to a certain extent, because an RPE, if the athlete has no experience, is meaningless.
Absolutely, yeah. It has to have been. I mean, they have to. An RPE takes time for
Right.
it to be meaningful. It's not just something you introduce today and start using.
And it's really only relative with a high level, more elite athlete.
Right.
And so you're guiding them, you're bringing them along.
Right.
You know, just like a good coach, go back to the etymology of the word coach, is the coach, the carriage that brings something of value to its destination. That's what a coach is supposed to do. This athlete's of value. We're going to build it up. And we're going to bring it to its destination. We're helping bring them along, but it has to be done in a, like Dr. Smolianov said, those two principles are huge that were discussed today. And I hope anybody listening understands the principle of consistency and that principle of gradualism. And we discussed that in Toronto. That was that just those are two basic concepts before you really get into Fringe. It really doesn't matter.
Yeah, but also, this is the given, but also without really inquisitive and very research and exploration oriented approach from both participant and athlete, progression is going to be very limited, and Fringe methodologies are going to be adopted when you have this constant mindset of inquisitive, curious exploration every day. You are looking for what is done within your competition. What is done what are your competitors doing on the first place?
Right.
But what is also done in other areas that could be relevant to what you're doing. So this creative process of exploring and researching, it is going to give you this Fringe method, methods introduced, and you are constantly trying them carefully on the top of what you're doing without compromising any safe practices that are already in place, but you're trying and you're testing. You are looking for new methods, for new ways, and you're constantly trying to implement them early in the season, in a safer period when you're not competing, during competitions that are not important, during the times that are not critical, and that relates to the concepts too, to the concepts of basic concept of periodization when you are trying to reach reach the peak, and before the competition taper a little bit, rest, and achieve super compensation, so that you have more power, more speed, more endurance on the day of competition. People who are successful in this, they're doing it in all areas of life. They're not doing it only in their physical performance, but they're doing it the same for mental performance, before exams at school, before presentations at work, when they do a presentation at work, when they have even important family or personal events. They use this basic concept of periodization, and they are constantly trying to bring your bring your body to the limit in all ways, mentally, physically, and try to understand where is the limit of my ability in endurance. Where is my limit in strength? Where is my limit in flexibility? Where is my limit in a complex coordination? Where do I start to lose the ball? So this is the fringe. This is the I think a very important condition of successful fringe methodologies adopted is your constant attempt to challenge yourself through the basic periodization, but also trying to introduce these new fringes and trying them, test them, experiment with them.
You know, and Peter, we've been going for about an hour right now, so a great way to summarize what you just said there is in the book Great by Choice, Jim Collins has a formula that they've identified with all these companies that are 10Xers, and it's just simply this: operating excellence plus innovation equals exponential growth. So what you said there really falls in line with that. What is operating? That's the foundation, the basics. That's the consistency, day in and day out. And your periodization. That's operating excellence. That's the 20-mile march. That's the system, the operating excellence. Then you've got to add the fringe methodology. That's innovation. Well, how do you do that? Well, it's got to be what is studied based on empirical evidence, which could be one, time tested that you've observed over time. Two, something that has been researched and there's data supporting. So it's you're not just throwing it in, and then you test it, like you said, at the right time, with the right athletes, that it doesn't interfere. And then and you're constantly doing that, you have your system, your operating excellence, and you add the innovation, the fringe methods at the right times, and then exponential growth occurs. And I think that's a great way to just kind of discuss or to finish where fringe methodologies fit in. That is the innovation, and done at the right time.
Yeah, I agree, and I this is great, kind of setting that platform for the next podcast. I think that the takeaway for the coaches is, number one, you need to learn your field really, really well. I mean, that cannot be overstated. Your commitment, and like what you talked about earlier, Dr. Smolianov, your commitment to learning, constantly looking and seeing what can I do to be better at my craft, has to be constant and incessant. Constantly looking at things. And the better you get at it, then when there's a new methodology, you're better equipped to know when to apply it or when to bring it in. But the younger the coach, you don't have enough experience to even know when to bring something in or what time and place that should happen. So it's done under the care of an expert coach, bringing fringe ideas into the picture because you understand it well enough and you have a background on the athlete to know kind of where they're at. So I think that all of that has to be taken in context. And you guys brought that out really well, in this discussion of that background first, and then, and then looking at what's on the fringe to help us move things forward. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I really appreciate your help with this one. Great discussion. And I look forward to our next discussion. We'll be getting together here pretty shortly to discuss these ideas a little further.
Thank you, Joseph.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks.
And Jed, our topic next time? We're going to be looking at long-term athletic development, correct?
Actually, before that, I think we're going. That was the initial plan, but we're going to
Okay.
break from the 20-mile march here for a second because
Okay.
COVID-19. We're actually going to look at what is happening on the Fringe as far as how people are training, how the rest of the world is coming back online. We're just going to have just a kind of a discussion on what's happening in the world because we have had a little bit of adversity and people are being forced to change, and little discussions on that using what we basically already discussed today.
That'll be
But
awesome.
we're gonna highlight some of the very practical things from the book that would help everyone learn from elite athletes how to be better prepared and better and survive situations like we're experiencing now.
Yeah, that's gonna be great. I look forward to it. So thank you very much to both of you. I really appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to getting together here real soon.
All right, perfect. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank you.
gentlemen.